Hey, welcome back to Business 150, Introduction to Management. We are now in our sixth video in Module 8. This video may end up to be the longest or perhaps the most technical of the videos in talking about organizations. And as you can see from this title slide, that's because we're talking about the topic of organizational structures. And so in this video, we're going to be looking at the actual examples of structures and major ways that companies choose to create departments and structure in their organizations. And so we hope at the end of this video, you will be able to describe departmentalization and organizational structure, as well as to detect different types of formal structures currently used. Things like functional structures, multi-divisional structures, hybrids of those, etc., etc. So what is organizational structure? It's the way that managers group jobs into departments and then departments into divisions. So it forms the actual framework, the structure of what we see, for instance, visually in an organizational chart, but really it provides the structure how relationships are formally set up. Departmentalization is the grouping of related jobs to form an administrative unit, whether you call that a department or an area or a center, however you, whatever terms you use in your particular organization. The point is you are grouping together related jobs into a cohesive whole and then using those individual parts to comprise the larger whole. You see in the third bullet point then, departmentalization is a normal stage in an organization's growth. Now, think about that for a moment. With a very small company, for instance, a sole proprietorship, where there's only maybe 3 people working in the entire company, well, departmentalization is somewhat unnecessary because everyone in the organization is wearing multiple hats, and therefore separating them into departments would be silly. It would be a waste of effort. However, think about instead the company when it grows from 3 people to 30, or perhaps from 30 to 60 or more. And once you get into larger amounts of employees, it really does help to provide some formal structure to group like-minded, similar roles together so that they can operate and cooperate more efficiently and formally, while making it clear to everyone in the company what groups of people are responsible and have authority over what types of roles. You can easily see why in a company of 30 people, it does help to have a separate accounting department and a separate sales group, and then to have managers over each of those departments. That's just an easy example of why that third bullet point, departmentalization, is a normal stage in an organization's growth. So let's consider, first of all, the first type of structure we call the functional structure. A functional structure is when an organization has departments, it structures its departments by function, like having an accounting department, or a marketing department, or an engineering department. You can see the departments are grouped together by function. Functional structure, you see in the second bullet point, is the grouping of jobs according to similar economic activities: finance, production, operations, marketing. And the functional structure is efficient and useful for capturing economies of scale. What does that mean? It means the kinds of gains and efficiencies that you get from having the people who all do that function cooperate and work together. And you can recognize and accomplish synergies and greater efficiencies because you're building on similar complementary expertise in the same domain area. When you have a department full of engineers working and cooperating and communicating together, you can do more and accomplish more in terms of engineering goals than if you had your engineers scattered across different departments in the organization. However, when you have functional structure, you have functional groupings of departments by similar economic function, it can make communication across departments difficult and costly. If you have ever experienced the kind of turf war where the operations department accuses the sales department, you guys don't have any idea how much work it is for us to have to actually execute and deliver to customers some of the outlandish promises you're making out there in the field. And then you get a response back that the sales department says, really? Because you have no idea how hard it is to actually close these customers with the product that sometimes you guys build with shoddy quality and mistakes, and we have to cover that stuff up by promising that we'll get it fixed. And then you see what we sometimes call the lobbing grenades of tribal belligerence over the divisional wall. You're going to get what I'm talking about. If you've ever experienced that in your job, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The weaknesses of functional structure, including turf wars, miscommunication, two different departments working at cross purposes towards one another, especially when departments and divisions get larger. One of the problems you run into is that each functional department can have its own micro corporate culture. And when corporate cultures aren't aware of each other, and you forget the whole point, which is you're all supposed to be serving the customer together rather than building your own little kingdom, well, that is when the ground becomes fertile territory for misunderstandings. And that is a very prevalent, recurring weakness of the functional structure. Nevertheless, many companies still use it because of the ease of getting all the accounting people to talk to one another, the ease of getting all the finance people to understand each other, etc., etc. It's an easy way to departmentalize. Many companies still use it, even with the built-in weaknesses. Well, that's the first one, the functional structure. Here's an example of functional structure from the textbook, figure 8.4. And you can see here, reporting to the CEO, you have these 6 different departments, and you can easily see how they are departmentalized based upon economic function, or what they actually end up doing for the company. That's just an example from the textbook. So let's move on. Another way of grouping together is not by economic function, but in terms of a multi-divisional structure. And you can see in the first bullet point, we define the multi-divisional structure as an organization grouping all the activities involved with a specific product, or a specific geographic region, or a specific type of customer, or some other external common denominator. Not economic function, but perhaps where they serve, or who they serve, or what products they make. Some other common denominator becomes the thing that they all share in common. And this structure you see in the life cycle of a business normally occurs when a firm grows so large that functional departments simply become cumbersome. And so instead, the company's big enough where they really are devoting an enormous amount of effort towards one geographic region. Well, let's just have that work as its own business unit. And perhaps you have an enormous amount of resources going to serving a particular type of customer. So let's just have them all work together as a business unit. And therefore, you see there when a company, last bullet point, when a company uses its different products as the basis for divisions, it is using what we call the product division structure. And it's easier to see these kinds of things with visual examples. So here's a few from the textbook. Here is figure 8.5, a multi-divisional structure in an organization. You see here how they've divided things up, right? There are global business units. There is a marketing development organization. There are corporate functions, and there is the global business services. They are setting these things up by larger discipline rather than individual economic function. And so you can see there that the marketing development organization might have its own sales division, as well as its own production division, as well as its own research and development division, which might be redundant for the corporate functions division on the far right. They might have all those same functions in their own department because they have their own set of organizational goals. Now that can be contrasted here with the figure 8.6, the product divisional structure. You can see here this particular company divides into 2 very big divisions, the beverage division and the food division. And then under them, you can see that there are specific lower subordinate divisions based upon what they're making. And you can sort of see there, just by the lines there, that there's some cross-fertilization occurring perhaps at the individual product level, but nevertheless, still they report to different divisional heads. That's product division. And then finally, there are other ways to divide up multi-divisionally, not just by product and not just by external shared concern, but also a geographic division structure is possible by customer type. There is even the holding company, which you see there in the third bullet point. A holding company is an organization composed of several very, very different kinds of businesses, each of which is permitted basically to operate pretty much as an autonomous business unit. And then finally, you have the hybrid structure, which is simply a combination of all of these kinds of things grouped together by one company. So let's see if we can give you some visual examples of that as well. Here is a geographical divisional structure from the textbook, figure 8.7. You can see immediately there, right under corporate, you have 5 divisions based upon where they're at in the United States, right? You have the Western region, the Midwestern region. You have one region for New York City all by itself, right? And so you can tell there's probably a great deal of focus and activity going on in New York. But then you also have a Northeast division and a Southern United States region also divided up in here. And so sometimes based upon how differently you do business in different regions of the country, it may call for individual geographic divisions, because quite frankly, doing business in the South is very, very different than doing business in New York City. Those of you perhaps who have visited or done business with clients or partners in both those regions, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because it could be no more truer even today. Doing business in New York, whole different thing than doing business in Georgia or Atlanta or Texas. Well, that's just one example. Here's another. You can see here, typically a bank has a customer divisional structure. And so they divide up their divisions based upon the type of customer, whether it's a retail consumer customer or a corporate customer or a venture capital customer or government. Right? All these kinds of things many times will end up with different needs, different products, different styles of products, and therefore it makes sense for many banks like Bank America or Wells Fargo or Chase Manhattan to really work based upon the type of customer, and that's how you divide up divisions. Now, the last will be the holding company. We described this very, very briefly, the multinational conglomerate. And the multinational conglomerate, you can see here, a division based on their insurance products, a separate division based upon financial products, and a third division based upon manufacturing. And there are some very large holding companies in the world. One of them would be Samsung, another is Sony, another is General Electric. These are all conglomerates that have very, very different types of business units, all under the corporate umbrella. And so we really have this unique name for them, that they are holding all of these divisions together in a holding company structure. There aren't that many of them in the world, as you might guess, but there are a few. And so you can see how for a holding company, it makes sense to allow these different divisions, these differentiated divisions, to operate as autonomous business units, all held under a corporate umbrella. Finally, the hybrid structure we noted here, look at this. This is a company that has a North American division, but they also have a Chinese division with many of the same redundant departments, but operating as its own business unit. Now, the Chinese division separates by product type, right? Whereas the North American division departmentalizes by function. And again, because they operate so differently, there probably are reasons why it makes sense to have different types of structures in the different divisions, all right? And of course, you can see there with the dotted line, while both divisions have a human resource department, a dedicated human resource department, both of those human resource departments do report to the global VP of HR as a way to oversee how HR is handled in the global corporate parent. So we hope that helps to define and differentiate all of these different structures just visually using an org chart. So we hope this helps, that after this video, as we mentioned, you're able to describe departmentalization in organizational structure and to see how all of these different types of formal structures, right? The functional, the multi-divisional, the hybrid, all the different flavors of multi-divisional structures, how these are all possibilities for different types of companies. And of course, the idea here is you want to identify the best and easiest way over the long haul for different departments and divisions to really function in a healthy way, in a way that promotes growth, that promotes performance, and then choosing a structure that really complements it, that benefits it, that supports that and undergirds it, rather than getting in the way and conflicting with the way that people would really work best. We hope that's helpful. More on this, of course, in the textbook. This is a way for you to get to see in different org charts how different relationships can be formally structured. Hope that helps. We'll see you in the next lecture.